Then lastly, on the sort of purely political side, confrontation between Iran and Israel. So we've seen in the news that Prime Minister Netanyahu ousted for the first time in, I try to think now, best part of a decade, if not more, with a new 8-party coalition. It's a fairly ragtag bunch from the religious right-wing Yamina party of Prime Minister Bennett through to the sort of centrist Yesh Atid of Yair Lapid, who's the alternative prime minister, through to left-wing Meretz and Labour, and then even the conservative Islamist Arab Israeli Ram party. So it's a real disparate bunch. It was very narrowly approved in the Knesset. So of the 120 legislators, it was a 60-59 vote to approve the government. So it very narrowly squeaked through. And so there's, a good degree of instability, and really the only thing that is properly unifying for all these parties is a desire to see Netanyahu go. However, whilst there are differences in a lot of ways, there is, I think, a good degree still of unity in terms of Iran, and at least the idea that, Iran and its nuclear ambitions are a threat. There is, however, divergence between sort of Bennett and Lapid particularly. I mean, Bennett much closer to the sort of hawkish Netanyahu line. But, again, also interesting continuity in that Benny Gantz remains as defense minister as was under the previous government. So in the end, really, what does this mean? It means that, again, perhaps slightly softer approach to the Netanyahu overall, but, still of quite a reluctant acceptance of the US return to the JCPOA, and Bennett in particular, the prime minister for now, strongly against that. In practical terms, Israel will keep up a lot of what it's been doing. So its military approach and security approach towards disrupting Iranian ambitions. So we saw recently what looks to have been quite a sophisticated cyber attack on a refinery, the nuclear centrifuges and sort of Iranian facilities at Natanz nuclear facility. Also, sort of assassinations potentially of key Iranian nuclear scientists, that sort of thing. It's very likely that will continue. I don't see it going away. Iran, for its part, is aware of what's going on, isn't necessarily going to be quick to react or to be goaded into doing something that will justify Israel's argument about it being a regional danger. So, generally it's better at being circumspect. I think there are some interesting potential sort of triggers for escalation. I think firstly is just if, there is an Iranian return, a US return to the agreement, and, any Iranian breaches that Israel can justify, it's likely that will be, place a lot of pressure on Bennett to be seen as acting strongly. And that's particularly in the case, I think, of, so it's not just the Iranian angle, but also Israeli domestic pressure. So Netanyahu, whilst he's lost the premiership, he's going to remain as leader of the opposition, and any opportunity he sees to paint Bennett as weak and to try to undermine, Bennett's idea to become the sort of leader on the right, and usurping Netanyahu in that sense, Netanyahu will take and really heap pressure on. And so there is, I think, an interesting possibility where there is some provocation by Iran that may be relatively minor, but that could easily end up being blown up into something wider as a result of that sort of domestic political pressure and the need for Bennett particularly to show himself as a hawk and taking a strong line. I think, perhaps one way in which things should calm down a little is in the sort of situation in terms of maritime risk. There's been a lot of tit for tat targeting of, Israeli and Iranian shipping, particularly Iranian oil shipping. I think that should, calm down at least a little bit for now, if only because, the US is looking to lift sanctions on Iranian oil, and so it becomes, I think, a little bit more difficult for Israel to justify those kind of attacks if they have now been made legitimate by the US. But certainly, Israeli bombardment of Iranian proxies in Syria and things like that, and scope, as I say, for more provocative action if there are intelligence threats that we won't necessarily know about. But those threats behind the scenes, I think those are important risks that will continue. But probably more than anything, quite a lot of more continuity than you might think, despite how much fanfare about this and the significance of the change. I think perhaps in the wider strategic sense, a lot of what Israel thinks and how it approaches the region will remain the same.